So now that you are in a place where you have thought about the summary, you've thought about your player experience, you've perhaps written a plot outline, or you've started to think about how your story might be structured, now we can move on to character creation, which for a lot of you might be kind of the fun part. So I don't know how many of you are like dungeon masters or game masters, or who have played TTRPGs before, who have made maybe a character in a D&D campaign or something like that. But I feel like having some kind of tabletop experience might help with character creation a little bit, or even if you've just created some characters in games. So this classification borrows both from books, from TTRPGs like Dungeons and Dragons. We distinguish between the playable and non-playable characters generally, between important characters and side characters, and between helpful or neutral and harmful characters. So there doesn't need to be only one protagonist and antagonist, but it is pretty common for them to be like singular characters in the game. So you may have a main character or a player character, sometimes called, also sometimes called the protagonist. Those are all interchangeable words. You probably have some playable characters or party characters, which are PCs, which may not be your main character, but may be like, you know, the player can interact with them in some way, or can control them. There may be non-playable characters or NPCs, who are other people that appear in the world, either in a helpful or a harmful or a neutral context. There may be a villain or an antagonist, maybe several, in fact. And there may be enemies in your game. So here is a way that we can start to structure some of these different characters depending on their roles. So you can make a graph where the y-axis is labeled important at the top and unimportant at the bottom. So there's an axis of importance, and then on the x-axis it's helpful on the left and harmful on the right. So there's an axis of helpfulness. So importance and helpfulness, right? This creates a field with 4 spaces: the important and helpful characters, the unimportant and helpful characters, important and harmful characters, and unimportant and harmful characters. And within each of those, we can start to place different character archetypes. So your main character is high importance and presumably high helpfulness to you, the player. You have a party character who is perhaps slightly less important than the main character and may therefore have less screen time or less development, but is still very helpful. You have a main villain, very important and very harmful, generally speaking. A regular boss in the game might be less important, but still firmly harmful. A quest giver could be helpful, but not very important. Shop owner might be very helpful, but not important at all. We don't really know anything about them, but they do sell us things that we want. And a regular enemy could be somewhat harmful, but also somewhat unimportant. They're just like a goon, right? So hopefully this kind of helps you. And you don't have to do this with archetypes. You could take your actual characters that you have fleshed out and plot them on a graph like this. And even you can submit that in your GDD if you want to. I will be happy to look at it. Okay. So the main character, or the player character. The following slides are mostly going to be a series of questions because I can't answer these for you. But asking the questions will hopefully help you to start framing who these people are. And that will help you to start creating the structure that you need to actually get through this project, right? So these questions are not a complete list, but they are a starting point to think about your characters from a systematic point of view. This is going to be a theme, at least in this lecture. So how do they fit into your gameplay pillars and your narrative themes? How do they relate to each other? What are their game mechanics or AI like? And how will a player learn about the game through them? So is this a preset character in terms of your main character? Is it preset? Is it a person that's made up and has a name and an appearance and all that? Or are they customizable? Is it something where you're expecting the player to put themselves into the character? So do they have a personality and speak for themselves, or is the player meant to speak and role play through them? What are their motivations for what they're trying to do? You can talk about this in terms of a character arc, which I'm going to go through, but like, do they have an initial motivation for beginning their adventure? Do they have some motivation to keep going? What is their relationship with other people? We're going to come back to that. So your party characters, can you recruit your party members, or do they like just sort of come, like, do they come along in the story? Are they specific people, or are they just archetypes or classes? So if you think about something like Final Fantasy Tactics, for example, you constantly recruit party members, but they're randomly generated. And they come with some specific abilities and classes and jobs and that sort of thing. But they don't really have like a story per se. Or you can go on the other end, it's maybe more like Fallout, where it's specific people with stories that you can explore in great detail and learn about these relationships. Do you build their abilities, or do they have a preset path for development? This is a little bit of a mechanics question, but this is important to answer, especially in your GDD, right? What are their motivations for aiding the main character? Why are they like part of the story? What has brought them into this fold? For your NPCs, how do they benefit the player or not? Does the player's choices affect them at all, or are they just sort of like static in the world? What are their lives like outside the player's experience of them? It's nice to have like at least a little bit of a knowledge of this, so that when you're doing your world building and when the player is in that world, they feel like it's more alive, that things are going on outside of them. And what are their motivations? For villains, your main antagonist or your major bosses, why do they oppose the main character? Do their motivations and choices change throughout the course of the story, or do they stay the same? Do these characters grow? Do they learn? Is their cause just? In the end, like, is that, part of your theme? How do they relate to your theme and thesis? Villains, more than anyone else, need to answer this question, because they're usually like the main point of friction, right? And what are their abilities? I mean that from a mechanical sense. Like, what are their game mechanics? What's their AI? For enemies, minor NPC enemies, how do they fit into the world? What are their abilities? What are their strengths and weaknesses? How does the player learn to defeat them? Again, these are like mechanical questions that you can answer. If you're thinking about like, enemies in a Metroidvania, you can say like, oh, it's armored on the top. You can only hit it from the bottom. And in order to do that, you have to flip it over using XX ability that your player character has. So you can answer those questions. So some of these questions, as you saw, are more on the mechanical side, and some of them are more on the narrative and drama side. It's up to you what you want to focus on most, but a well-rounded game will have thought about both. And at some point, you're going to have to think about your mechanics. So developing characters is all about asking questions. There are way more questions than the ones that I have posed there, but those are some of the interesting and important ones. So here are some considerations. This is what I have in the assignment for characters. You can put these subheadings in your GDD if you like. And in the template, I did include a table that you can make for each character that includes these subheadings, and you feel free to copy and paste that table. It's structured in a way that you have lots of room to write if you need to. So we've got backstory, personality, main arc, relationships to other characters, appearance, and abilities. So backstory, how did this character get to the point where they enter the story? This is good to establish even if you never reveal it in your narrative at any time, because it affects their personality, and it's going to affect the way that you write them and the way that their voice comes out in the story, and even literally the way they're voice acted, if that's something that is a concern. Their personality. So how does this character act in general? What's their dominant emotion? This can be based on an archetype at first, and then it can be fleshed out if need be. What are their behavioral triggers? So what makes them upset or excited? Do they have past trauma that affects them? Do they have like a great flaw that is going to come up? Do they have, some endearing trait that, keeps the party together? So you can look at archetypes in personality tests, in astrology, psychology, mythology, people There are lots of places to look for these kinds of archetypes. That is to say nothing of the veracity of any of these. It's just that they're a good place to find like descriptions of personalities. So their main arc. How does this character change, or what does the character learn in the course of the story? This can go back to, like, you can tie this back to your theme or your thesis, especially for the main character. Probably their arc is going to, in some way, be reflective of the theme of the story. What major decisions do they face? Who and what are their biggest obstacles to reaching their goals? So their arc can be positive, negative, or neutral. This can mean that they, experience positive change. They grow as a person and become a better person, if you will. It can be negative. They can, become more despondent, become more evil, or pushed to some path that, isn't in, or sort of like goes against your thesis, if that's something that is important to you. Or it can be neutral. Their relationship to the other characters. So who does the character get along with or dislike in your, you can make this, that's sort of a matrix of all the characters in your game. For each character, you can define their relationship with all the other characters. So you can say, okay, these two are friends, these two are relatives, these two are acquaintances, these two are strangers, these are partners, these are enemies, these are rivals. What's their relationship with the other people in the story? Again, that's going to give you a starting point and a springboard to talk about how they react to that person. And different characters may perceive their relationships differently too, right? Somebody might consider somebody a rival, and the other person considers them a friend, or an acquaintance, or a stranger even. And that can create some tension as well, right? When and how do they connect to the other characters' stories? Did they all meet in a tavern and decide to go on an adventure, or how do they actually connect to each other? And how do their arcs impact their relationships? How do they impact other people in the story, and maybe even the events of the story? So appearance. If you don't want to decide on appearance right now, you can save this section for the art direction portion if you prefer, because a lot of people like to tie character fashion into their art direction, and I think that's valid. So how does this character present themselves visually and in other ways if appropriate, like their voice? What's their style or their fashion? Do they take care of their appearance or not? Why? And how does their appearance reflect the world or the setting? And then finally, their abilities. This part I do want you to do because I think it's important that you have at least your main character and your main villain fleshed out in terms of mechanics. So what can this character do? What are their verbs? Going back to our mechanics lecture. How do they develop or change from a mechanical perspective? So what abilities, equipment, items, skill trees, stuff do they obtain? Does this reflect their arc, or is there any way to tie the mechanics of how they, progress as a mechanical feature of the game to how they progress in a narrative way? And do their abilities relate to or depend on other characters? So do you have combos? Is there stuff that's suppressed in the presence of an enemy and that sort of thing? And then finally on Discord, if you like, you can talk about how you create characters. So again, if there's any DMs or GMs or players here, anybody who's written a story before, what do you do to create characters? How do you figure out their story and their backstory, or their appearance, their personality? Do you use a random number generator? I used to do that when I was a teenager. Use RNG to determine initial personalities and grow from there. Do you use archetypes? So tell me your strategies. I'd be very interested to know. And I think all approaches are valid. But eventually you are going to have to answer these questions. So it's good to think about now. And for your GDD, to think about your main character, a main villain, if there is one, any player characters, if there are some initial ones. Because again, you're really only building your GDD out to an initial prototype. And some basic enemy types. Those are, if there's enemies, those are sort of the basics for the purpose of the assignment.